Gravity is a tyrant. But to a human born under the crushing weight of Earth, a low-gravity world isn't a vacation. It's an unchaining. When the sky cracked open, the natives didn't pray to their gods. They watched a 19-year-old human cadet become a god of war. Cadet Conrad Hayes hated the suit. It was a masterpiece of human engineering. A Mark IV density rig manufactured by Lockheed Martin's extrasolar division. But to Conrad, it was a portable prison. Planet Ethelgard boasted a surface gravity of exactly 0.28 gs. For the indigenous population, this was paradise. They were beautiful, towering creatures averaging 7 feet tall, with willowy limbs, hollow bones akin to avian species, and pale, translucent skin that shimmered in the light of their binary suns. They moved with a dancer's grace, drifting across the crystalline floors of their grand cities like leaves caught in a gentle breeze. For a human born in the unforgiving, bone-grinding gravity of Earth, Ethelgard was a hazard. Cadet Hayes, your telemetry indicates a spike in heart rate. The cold, synthetic voice of his suit's internal AI chimed in his earpiece. Please adjust your pacing. The general dynamic servos are operating at maximum resistance. I know, Conrad muttered, gritting his teeth as he forced his foot downward. Every step required conscious, exhausting effort. The Lockheed Martin rig was designed to simulate Earth's gravity by resisting his movements. It weighed over 120 kilograms and locked his joints with magnetic dampeners. If he took the suit off, his muscles, evolved to carry his dense 85-kilogram frame across Earth's surface, would launch him into the ceiling with a single careless stride. Conrad was part of the first United Earth Directorate Exchange program. Humanity was the new player on the galactic stage, having only discovered faster-than-light travel 3 decades prior via the SpaceX Deep Void initiative. The Ethel, an ancient and culturally refined species, had graciously allowed one human into their prestigious military academy, the Spire of Winds. It was meant to be a symbol of unity. Instead, it was an exercise in daily humiliation. Look at the Terran, a melodic voice whispered in perfect translator-rendered English. Conrad didn't have to turn his head to know it was Cadet Valerius, one of the top-ranking Ethel students. He moves like a dying beast. How did his species ever survive their cradle world? They are primitive, Valerius, replied another cadet, a female named Livia. Their world is a high-gravity death trap. It made them dense, slow, and overly reliant on that crude metal armor. He can barely walk up the amphitheater steps. Conrad ignored them, focusing on his breathing. He reached the top of the sweeping, glass-like staircase of the Academy's central plaza. The air was thin, supplemented by the oxygen scrubbers in his collar. Below him, the grand city of Zephyr stretched out, a breathtaking metropolis of floating platforms and elegant, needle-like towers tethered by carbon nanotube cables. His commanding officer back at Colorado Springs, Captain Arthur Pendleton, had warned him. They're going to look down on you, Hayes. They see elegance as superiority. They see our heavy industry and our dense bodies as barbaric. You let them talk. You wear that suit, you keep your head down, and you show them human discipline. Do not, under any circumstances, remove the dampeners. If you shatter one of their hollow-boned aristocrats in a sparring match, it'll cause an interstellar incident. So Conrad played the role of the clumsy, lumbering brute. He sat at the back of the tactical lectures, his reinforced chair groaning under the weight of his suit. He participated in their zero-impact strategic simulations, where his mind proved sharp, but his physical presence remained a joke. In the gymnasium, while the Ethel cadets leaped 30 feet into the air, engaging in dazzling midair martial arts that looked more like ballet, Conrad was forced to walk the perimeter, sweating inside his magnetic prison. But the political reality of the galaxy was shifting, and the pristine isolation of Ethelgard was about to be violently interrupted. The Outer Rim territories had been suffering raids from the Corsan Syndicate. The Corsans were a ruthless, heavily augmented mercenary faction from a high-density world. They were brutal, cybernetically enhanced, and cared nothing for galactic treaties. Intelligence suggested they were miles away from Ethelgard sector, engaged in a proxy war with the mining colonies of the Orion Spur. Intelligence was wrong. It was during the Solstice Gala, a massive diplomatic gathering held at the pinnacle of the Spire of Winds, that the illusion of safety shattered. Earth's ambassador, Eleanor Harding, had arrived on a sleek Boeing diplomatic cruiser, accompanied by a small contingent of lightly armed human security. Conrad was ordered to attend in full dress uniform, which unfortunately meant wearing a modified ceremonial version of his Lockheed rig. The gala was breathtaking. High-ranking Ethel officials, adorned in silk-like fabrics that floated in the low gravity, mingled with diplomats from across the sector. A sweeping panoramic window made of transparent aluminum offered a view of the stars. Soft, harmonic music played from floating acoustic drums. Conrad stood near the edge of the room, holding a flute of water, watching Ambassador Harding speak with the Ethel High Chancellor, a towering figure named Gideon. "You look uncomfortable, Cadet Hayes," Ambassador Harding noted, stepping away from the Chancellor for a brief moment to check on her countrymen. "Just heavy, ma'am," Conrad replied respectfully, his posture rigid. "The servos in this ceremonial rig aren't as smooth as my field suit." "Bear it a little longer, Conrad." Harding smiled softly. "Tonight, we sign the trade agreement. Tomorrow, humanity gets access to Ethelgard's zero-point energy patents, and we provide them with our heavy metallurgy manufacturing. We need this." Conrad nodded. "Understood, ma'am." He took a sip of his water. As he lowered the glass, a high-pitched whine pierced the harmonic music. It was a sound Conrad recognized from his orbital drop training back on Earth, the sound of atmospheric friction caused by something moving far too fast, burning through the sky without a braking thruster. Conrad turned toward the massive panoramic window just as the proximity alarms began to scream. The impact was catastrophic. A Corson breaching pod, painted in radar-absorbent matte black, slammed directly into the side of the Spire of Winds. In Earth's gravity, the massive kinetic strike would have pulverized the building's floor. Here, in 0.28 GS, the sheer force of the impact tore through the transparent aluminum window like tissue paper, sending massive, jagged shards of debris floating across the ballroom at terrifying low-friction speeds. The sound was deafening. A concussive boom followed by the shrieking vacuum of a localized pressure drop before the spire's emergency atmospheric shields activated, snapping into place with a crackle of blue energy. Chaos erupted. The beautiful, elegant Ethel were thrown like rag dolls by the shockwave. Their hollow bones, evolutionary marvels of a gentle world, betrayed them. The room was instantly filled with the sickening sound of snapping limbs and, "Send the next part whenever you're ready, and I'll continue in the same style without changing the story." High-pitched screams filled the air. Conrad's Lockheed suit automatically locked its joints, anchoring him to the floor. The blast wave washed over him, barely moving his 120-kilogram mass. He watched in horror as Cadet Valerius, who had been mocking him just days prior, was hurled against a decorative pillar, his fragile arm bending at an unnatural angle. The heavy blast doors of the Corson pod hissed open, and the nightmares poured out. There were 20 of them. The Corsons were bipedal, heavily muscled, and encased in dark gray combat armor. They carried kinetic slug throwers, barbaric heavy weapons that fired solid tungsten rounds, highly illegal in this sector. They moved with the jerky, hyper-aggressive speed of creatures used to fighting in standard gravity, finding Ethelgard's low gravity to be an advantage for rapid deployment. Execute the guards. Secure the Chancellor and the Terran Ambassador. The Corson leader barked through a localized comms channel, his voice a mechanical rasp. The Ethel security forces, armed with elegant but slow-firing plasma lances, tried to mount a defense. It was a slaughter. The Corsons moved too fast, their heavy kinetic rounds tearing through the Ethel, shattering their delicate bodies with explosive force. In the low gravity, the blood didn't pool. It sprayed in long crimson arcs, floating in the air like gruesome ribbons. "Ambassador!" Conrad roared, his voice cutting through the panic. Eleanor Harding was on the ground, bleeding from a shrapnel cut on her forehead. 2 human security guards lay dead near her, their light body armor no match for Corson tungsten rounds. Conrad forced his suit to move. The servos whined in protest as he threw himself between the ambassador and the advancing mercenaries. He raised his heavy armored arms just as a Corsan raider opened fire. Clack, 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 clack. The tungsten rounds slammed into Conrad's Lockheed density rig. The rig was designed to simulate Earth's gravity, meaning its plating was composed of dense, military-grade titanium carbide. The rounds sparked and ricocheted off him, leaving deep dents but failing to penetrate. The sheer kinetic force, however, pushed Conrad back a few inches. "A heavy infantryman?" the Corsan raider sneered, aiming his weapon at Conrad's unarmored helmet visor. "In a ceremonial rig? You're a sitting duck, human." Conrad knew he was right. His suit was designed for resistance training, not combat mobility. He couldn't dodge. He couldn't outrun them. He could barely raise his arms fast enough to protect his face. Behind him, Chancellor Gideon was dragged to his knees by two massive Corsan warriors. Cadet Valerius was weeping in pain on the floor, watching his leaders being taken hostage. The beautiful, untouchable Ethel were utterly broken in a matter of seconds. "Stand down, boy." The Corsan leader stepped forward, drawing a vibrating thermal blade. "That suit is locking up. I can hear the servos failing from the impacts. You can't even move." It was true. The telemetry in Conrad's HUD was flashing red. "Warning. Servo motor damage in left knee. Warning. Magnetic dampeners misaligned. Warning. Mobility compromised." Conrad glanced over his shoulder. Ambassador Harding looked at him, her eyes wide with terror, but she gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. She knew this was the end. The spire was isolated. The local defense forces were miles down the tower and wouldn't make it past the Corsan breaching charges. Conrad looked back at the Corsan leader. He looked at the blood floating in the low-gravity air. He looked at the fragile Ethel, sobbing and clutching their shattered bones. Then Conrad looked at his HUD. He focused his reticle on the system command prompt. Captain Pendleton's voice echoed in his mind. "Do not, under any circumstances, remove the dampeners." "Sorry, Captain," Conrad whispered. With a sharp blink of his right eye, Conrad selected the emergency override protocol on his Lockheed rig. Command, emergency egress. Explosive bolts armed. "What did you say, human?" the Corsan leader growled, stepping closer, raising his thermal blade to decapitate the immobile cadet. Conrad looked the alien dead in the eyes. "I said, I'm dropping the weight." Command confirmed. Detonating. With a deafening crack, the General Dynamics explosive bolts, situated at the joints and seams of Conrad's density rig, detonated simultaneously. The heavy titanium carbide plating blew outward in a cloud of smoke and pressurized gas. 120 kilograms of dead weight fell away, crashing heavily onto the crystalline floor. The Corsan leader flinched, raising a heavily armored arm to shield his eyes from the smoke. When the smoke cleared a second later, the heavy, lumbering human brute was gone. Standing in the center of the debris, wearing only a sleek, black, form-fitting synthetic undersuit, was Conrad Hayes. He felt a sensation he hadn't experienced in 6 months. Lightness. His muscles, bred by millions of years of evolution to push against the relentless 9.8 meters per square second gravity of Earth, were suddenly completely unrestrained. His heart, a powerful pump designed to fight massive atmospheric pressure, beat with terrifying efficiency. On Earth, Conrad was a highly trained OCS cadet. On Ethelgard, under 0.28 GS, he was a weapon of mass destruction. The Corsan leader laughed, a harsh, grinding sound. "You stripped your armor, you suicidal primate? Fire!" 3 Corsan mercenaries raised their slug throwers. Conrad didn't think. He relied on pure, drilled muscle memory from Earth. He dropped his center of gravity and pushed off his back leg to sprint toward the nearest cover. He didn't sprint. He erupted. The sheer kinetic force of his leg muscles pushing against the floor without the 120-kilogram suit holding him down caused the crystalline tiles beneath his boots to shatter into powder. Conrad crossed the 40-foot distance between himself and the mercenaries in less than a second. To the eyes of the Corsans and the terrified Ethel watching from the floor, the human simply vanished in a blur of black fabric. Conrad slammed into the chest of the first Corsan mercenary. On Earth, A full-speed tackle from an 85-kilogram man in combat gear was devastating. On Ethelgard, moving at a velocity allowed by near-zero air resistance and fractional gravity, Conrad hit the heavily armored alien with the kinetic energy of a speeding freight train. The Corson's chest plate caved in with a sickening crunch. The alien was launched backward, lifting completely off the ground and sailing 50 feet through the air before violently impacting a structural pillar. The mercenary crumpled, instantly dead. Conrad didn't stop. The momentum of the tackle had sent him airborne. He was floating, drifting upward toward the high-vaulted ceiling. "He's in the air. Shoot him!" The Corson leader bellowed, panic replacing his previous arrogance. Tracking weapons swiveled upward, but Conrad wasn't drifting helplessly. He reached out, grabbing a decorative chandelier hanging from the ceiling. His human grip strength, conditioned by Earth's gravity, crushed the delicate metal. Using the chandelier as an anchor, he violently swung his body, changing his trajectory midair. He launched himself downward, feet first, directly at the second mercenary. The alien tried to track him, but Conrad was moving too fast. He was ricocheting off the environment like a pinball. He hit the floor directly in front of the Corson, the impact cracking the tiles, and instantly uncoiled his legs, driving a devastating uppercut into the underside of the alien's helmet. The sound of the Corson's neck snapping echoed through the ballroom. The alien's body was lifted 10 feet into the air from the force of the punch, spinning wildly before crashing down. "Demon!" one of the Corsons shrieked in his native tongue. "It's a flying demon!" The Ethel hostages watched in absolute, paralyzed horror. Cadet Valerius, clutching his broken arm, stared with wide, unblinking eyes. The human he had mocked for being slow and clumsy was currently bouncing off the walls, the ceiling, and the pillars, changing directions with impossible speed and striking with bone-pulverizing force. Conrad grabbed a discarded Corson slug thrower from the air as it floated away from the dead mercenary. The heavy weapon felt like a plastic toy in his hands. He didn't even bother aiming down the sights. He landed on a vertical pillar, his boots finding purchase, and used his powerful legs to hold himself completely perpendicular to the floor. He fired 3 times. 3 tungsten rounds tore through the visor of a Corson aiming at Ambassador Harding. Conrad pushed off the pillar, launching himself horizontally across the room. A mercenary fired a plasma burst, scorching Conrad's shoulder, but the pain barely registered through the massive adrenaline dump. He hit the ground rolling, grabbed the leg of a nearby table, and hurled it. The table spun through the low-gravity air like a deadly frisbee, smashing into 2 Corsons and pinning them against the wall. Form up! Form up! Concentrate fire!" the Corson leader screamed, backing away toward the Chancellor. He held his thermal blade to the Ethel leader's throat. "Stop moving or the Chancellor dies." Conrad landed gracefully on a balcony railing 30 feet away, crouching like a gargoyle. His chest heaved, pulling in the thin air. But he wasn't exhausted. He felt electric. He felt alive. His black undersuit was torn at the shoulder, revealing dense, highly developed human musculature underneath. The remaining 10 Corson mercenaries formed a defensive perimeter around their leader, their weapons aimed at the balcony. "You think you're fast, ape?" the leader snarled, though his hand trembled slightly against the Chancellor's throat. "In a straight line, maybe, but you can't dodge 10 guns. Surrender, or the aristocrat's head comes off." Chancellor Gideon looked up at Conrad. For the first time, the tall, majestic alien didn't look upon the human with mild, patronizing amusement. He looked at him with absolute, terrified awe. To the Ethel, a species that evolved without natural predators, violence was an abstract concept. But looking at the human crouched on the railing, coiled tight as a spring, his eyes burning with predatory focus, Gideon finally understood why Earth was considered a Class 10 death world. Conrad didn't speak. He calculated the distance. 30 feet. 10 guns. In Earth's gravity, a 30-foot leap from a standing position was impossible for a human. Here it was a simple broad jump. Conrad tightened his grip on the railing. The metal groaned and warped under his fingers. "I said surrender," the Corson leader yelled. Conrad smiled, a terrifying, primal baring of teeth. Gravity's a bitch, Conrad whispered. He lunged. The railing behind him exploded outward into a shower of sparks and sheared metal, unable to withstand the sheer kinetic kickoff of human legs. Conrad didn't jump. He flew. He moved so fast that the Corson mercenaries fired their weapons at empty air, tracking where he had been a fraction of a second before. He crossed the 30-foot gap horizontally, remaining entirely parallel to the floor. Before the Corson leader could react, before he could even tighten his grip on the thermal blade, Conrad crashed into him. The impact sounded like a bomb going off. Conrad's shoulder caught the Corson leader squarely in the chest plate. The sheer force ripped the mercenary completely off his feet, tearing him away from Chancellor Gideon. They collided with the far wall of the ballroom. The heavily reinforced structural wall spider-webbed with massive cracks. The Corson leader's armor crumpled like tin foil, his internal organs pulverized by the sudden, massive deceleration. Conrad dropped to the floor, breathing heavily, standing over the broken body of the Corson commander. The remaining 9 mercenaries stared at their dead leader, then at the human who had just crossed the room faster than their combat optics could track. Slowly, Conrad turned around to face them. He wiped a streak of blood from his cheek. Corson blood. He didn't raise a weapon. He simply cracked his knuckles. The sound, sharp and loud in the sudden silence of the room, was the most terrifying thing the surviving aliens had ever heard. Weapons clattered to the floor. The Corson mercenaries raised their hands, dropping to their knees in absolute surrender. The ballroom was dead silent, save for the hum of the emergency atmospheric shields. Conrad took a deep breath, trying to slow his racing heart. He walked slowly, intentionally exaggerating the softness of his steps so he wouldn't crack the floor tiles, and approached Ambassador Harding. He extended a hand. "Are you all right, ma'am?" Harding looked at his hand, then up at his face. She let out a shaky breath and took his hand, letting him effortlessly pull her to her feet. I am, Cadet. Thank you." Conrad turned to look at the Ethel. Chancellor Gideon was staring at him, trembling. Cadet Valerius was weeping silently, not from the pain in his arm, but from the profound, paradigm-shifting realization of what humans truly were. They weren't clumsy brutes. They weren't slow, lumbering beasts that needed heavy armor to survive. They were apex predators, forged in a crushing gravity well that made their muscles dense, their bones hard as steel, and their speed incomprehensible. The suits weren't just for human comfort. The suits were to protect the rest of the galaxy from them. The silence that followed the slaughter in the Spire of Winds was heavier and far more suffocating than Earth's gravity. When the Ethelgard emergency medical teams finally breached the perimeter of the Grand Ballroom, hovering in on silent repulsor lift stretchers, they completely froze. The pristine crystalline architecture of their most sacred diplomatic hall was an unrecognizable ruin of shattered transparent aluminum, warped structural pillars, and crimson blood that still drifted in the low-gravity air like macabre crimson ribbons. In the center of it all sat Cadet Conrad Hayes. He was currently trying, and visibly failing, to hold a delicate Ethelgardian medical scanner without his trembling, adrenaline-soaked fingers crushing its fragile polymer casing. He was swiftly escorted to a secure subterranean observation suite within the Academy's primary infirmary. It wasn't officially designated as a holding cell, but the presence of 6 heavily armed and visibly terrified Ethel Royal Guards stationed outside the reinforced door made it explicitly clear that Conrad was, for all intents and purposes, under quarantine. "The data must be a calibration error. It is simply incomprehensible," whispered Medical Director Kalen, standing in the darkened observation room alongside Chancellor Gideon. They were looking through a one-way mirror at the human cadet. Beside them, a holographic projection floated in the air, rendered by a newly imported, top-of-the-line Siemens Healthineers deep tissue scanner. "Explain it to me, Doctor," Gideon ordered, his voice hollow. The image of the human moving faster than the eye could track, tearing through heavily armored mercenaries, was permanently burned into the Chancellor's mind. "Look at this skeletal structure," Kalen said, his pale, elongated fingers trembling as he manipulated the hologram to zoom in on Conrad's femurs. Our bones are avian in nature, hollow, lightweight, designed for grace and aerial mobility in 0.28 gs. This human skeleton is a biological fortress. See these microscopic ridges? They are microfractures. Merely walking on his native planet causes the human skeleton to constantly break down and rebuild itself, packing calcium and heavy metallic minerals into a hyperdense matrix. It resembles military-grade carbon fiber more than biological tissue. The doctor swiped his hand, shifting the scan to the musculature. And his muscle fibers. Chancellor, they are braided. Layer upon agonizing layer of dense, fast-twitch tissue designed to operate under crushing atmospheric pressure and a relentless gravitational pull. They evolved to survive a planetary environment that actively tries to crush them into the dirt every single second of their lives. Kalen swallowed hard, lowering his hand. When the cadet initiated the explosive egress of his mechanized suit, we assumed he was rendering himself defenseless out of desperation. We were profoundly, mortally wrong. That Lockheed Martin density rig was not his armor, Chancellor. The suit was a cage. We asked an apex predator to walk among our children, and we had the audacity to complain that he wore a muzzle. Inside the reinforced medical suite, Conrad sat rigidly on the edge of the examination bed. He was terrified to relax. Every time he shifted his weight, the delicate, aesthetically pleasing Ethel furniture groaned under his dense mass. The door hissed open, and Ambassador Eleanor Harding walked in, completely bypassing the royal guards. She looked immaculate, save for a small bandage over her temple where she had been grazed by shrapnel. "You did good, Cadet," Harding said, her voice steady and professional, though her hand still bore the faint, uncontrollable tremor of the day's massive adrenaline dump. "Captain Pendleton is going to have an aneurysm when he reads the structural damage report you caused to the spire's foundational pillars, but you saved the Chancellor's life. You saved my life." "I broke standing protocol, ma'am," Conrad replied, keeping his voice low, acutely aware of the surveillance microphones hidden in the walls. "I engaged the emergency explosive egress. I compromised a $100 million Lockheed rig, and I exposed human biological capabilities to a foreign power. I think the executives at Lockheed Martin will be more than happy to write it off as a highly successful field test, given the geopolitical results," Harding offered with a sharp, calculating smile. "The political landscape of the entire sector has just tilted violently on its axis. Before today, the Ethel viewed us as crude, heavy-handed laborers. We were a junior partner, practically begging for their zero-point energy patents. Now, Chancellor Gideon realizes that the universe is a dark, brutal place, and elegance doesn't stop kinetic slugs. They need a shield, and they just watched you become one." Harding stepped closer, pulling a sleek, encrypted data pad from her jacket. She swiped a finger across the screen, bringing up a live, classified tactical feed. Her diplomatic warmth instantly vanished, replaced by the cold, hard edge of a United Earth Directorate official. "But we have a much larger, immediate problem, Conrad," she said softly. "The Corson mercenaries you neutralized in the ballroom were merely a vanguard unit. We ran their localized communications telemetry through our Palantir predictive threat algorithms. They weren't just here to take hostages for political ransom. They were a decapitation strike team sent to eliminate the Ethel leadership and sever the automated orbital defense coordination." Conrad's eyes narrowed. The combat adrenaline, which had been slowly and agonizingly receding from his bloodstream, began to pool in his chest once again. He stood up, deliberately forcing his legs to absorb the movement so he wouldn't accidentally launch himself into the ceiling. "An invasion force, ma'am?" "A Corson Syndicate dreadnought," Harding confirmed, pointing to a massive red contact on the data pad. "Our deep space DARPA telemetry buoys just picked it up. It bypassed the outer rim early warning nets by utilizing a highly illegal dark matter slipstream drive. It will break orbit directly above Ethelgard in exactly 4 hours. The Ethel local defense fleets are completely, hopelessly unprepared. Their plasma lances will just bounce off the Corson's heavy ablative hull plating." 4 hours. Conrad paced the room, the crystalline floor cracking slightly under the heel of his boot. "Ambassador, I need my tactical gear. I need a proper heavy weapon, not just a salvaged slug thrower. I can't hold off a dreadnought's ground invasion alone, but I can secure the primary extraction zone for you and the Chancellor." Harding looked at the young cadet. He was 19 years old, a kid from the high-gravity plains of Texas, standing entirely alone on a hostile, fragile alien world, offering to fight an invading army with his bare hands if necessary. "You won't have to hold the line alone, Cadet Hayes," Harding said, her voice dropping to a low, reverent whisper. "The moment the spire's structural integrity was breached, I didn't just send a localized distress signal to the local authorities. I activated the United Earth Directorate's Priority Alpha Red Code. I called the Vanguard." Conrad physically froze. The Vanguard. They were a terrifying myth among the standard Academy cadets back in Colorado Springs. A specialized, highly classified orbital drop division that had been training in secret on the extreme, crushing gravity colonies of Jupiter's heaviest moons. They were stationed 3 sectors away on a joint live-fire exercise. Harding checked her chronometer. "They are burning their engines hard for Ethelgard right now. But, Conrad, they aren't bringing density suits. The Ethel haven't just seen what one unchained human can do. In less than 4 hours, they're going to see an entire battalion." Harding looked up, her eyes reflecting the grim, undeniable reality of human warfare. "The UED Security Council has authorized full kinetic release." The sky above Zephyr, normally a breathtaking canvas of twin sunsets and shimmering auroras, turned a violent, bruised purple. The Corson Dreadnought, a massive wedge of brutalist dark iron and heavy weaponry, blotted out the light. It descended through the upper atmosphere with a low, bone-rattling hum that shattered glass across the floating city. In the emergency bunker beneath the Spire of Winds, Chancellor Gideon paced frantically. Surrounding him were the remnants of his Planetary Defense Council, monitoring holographic displays of the dreadnought. Cadet Valerius, his arms set in a biocast, stood quietly in the corner, his eyes constantly darting toward Conrad. Conrad stood by the blast doors, clad once again in a black synthetic undersuit, holding a heavy Corson slug thrower he had claimed from the ballroom. "They are demanding unconditional surrender," a panicked Ethel Comms officer reported, his voice cracking. "They say they will begin orbital bombardment of the lower residential sectors in 10 minutes if we do not lower the planetary energy shields. Our shields will not hold against a sustained kinetic bombardment," Gideon said, his hollow, translucent face pale with despair. He turned to Ambassador Harding. "Eleanor, you said Earth was sending aid. Where is your fleet? I see nothing on the orbital scanners." "Humanity doesn't fight ship to ship if we can avoid it, Chancellor," Harding said calmly, checking her data pad. "Ships are expensive. Gravity is free." "What does that mean?" Gideon demanded. "Look at the telemetry directly above the dreadnought." Harding pointed at the holographic display. The Ethel sensor technician adjusted the feed. Suddenly, a swarm of tiny high-velocity contacts appeared on the board. There were hundreds of them. They weren't ships. They were too small, emitting 0 thermal signatures and dropping completely dark. "Meteorites?" Valerius asked, stepping forward, his confusion overriding his fear. "Debris. Tungsten drop pods," Conrad answered, his voice barely above a whisper. A fierce, terrifying pride swelled in his chest. No retro-rockets. No deceleration burns. Just pure, unadulterated mass accelerating toward a target. On the holographic display, the swarm of human drop pods hit the Corson dreadnought. The Ethel had expected the humans to attack the shields with plasma or lasers. Instead, the United Earth Directorate used kinetic energy. Hundreds of massive, solid tungsten pods, falling at terminal velocity, slammed into the top of the dreadnought. The impact tore through the Corson's heavily armored hull like a shotgun blast through an aluminum can. The dreadnought shuddered violently in the sky above the city. Massive internal explosions bloomed along its spine. The ship's anti-gravity repulsors whined and sparked, failing under the devastating kinetic strikes. They They destroyed the ship using inert metal? Gideon gasped, stumbling backward. They didn't just destroy the ship, Chancellor, Harding corrected, a grim shadow falling over her features. They boarded it. Inside the dreadnought, hell was breaking loose. The human vanguard didn't fight like the elegant Ethel. They didn't fight like the heavily armored Corsans. They fought like demons. Through intercepted audio feeds bleeding into the bunker's comms, the Ethel Council listened in frozen horror. There were no sounds of human plasma fire. There was only the staccato roar of heavy kinetic rifles, the tearing of metal, and the terrified, guttural screams of Corsan mercenaries. Breach successful. Gravity plating offline. Zero-G combat authorized. Push forward. Tear them apart. A cold, clipped human voice echoed over the open comms. The Vanguard forces, wearing specialized Raytheon tactical webbing that provided maximum mobility, were treating the internal corridors of the Corsan ship like a playground. Unhindered by gravity, moving with the terrifying muscle memory of Earth's oppressive pull, the human Marines were ricocheting down the hallways faster than the Corsans could track. "We're receiving a transmission from the Corsan commander," the Ethel comms officer stammered. "Put it through," Gideon ordered. The face of a heavily scarred Corsan warlord appeared on the screen. He wasn't arrogant anymore. He was covered in blood, and the background of his bridge was engulfed in smoke. "Ethelgard, call them off!" the warlord screamed, his eyes wide with a primal terror no Ethel had ever seen in the Syndicate. "Call off your monsters. We surrender. We yield the sector. Just make them stop." Before Gideon could respond, the heavy blast doors on the Corsan bridge violently buckled inward on the video feed. A human Marine, moving with a speed that blurred the camera, slammed into the warlord, driving a combat knife straight through the alien's kinetic shielding and into his chest plate. The feed cut to static. The bunker was dead silent. The mighty Corsan Syndicate, the terror of the Outer Rim, had been utterly dismantled in less than 12 minutes. Harding smoothed the front of her diplomatic blazer. "Chancellor Gideon, I believe the United Earth Directorate has fulfilled its obligation to protect this sector. Shall we discuss the new terms of our zero-point energy trade agreement?" Gideon looked at the static on the screen, then at Ambassador Harding, and finally at Cadet Conrad Hayes. The tall alien swallowed heavily, a profound realization settling over him. The galaxy was not a place of poetry and light. It was a dark forest, and humanity was the apex predator lurking in the shadows, kept in check only by the gravity of their own cradle world. "Yes, Ambassador," Gideon whispered, bowing his head in total submission. "We will give humanity whatever they require. Just promise us you will never take off your weighted suits on our world again." Conrad lowered his weapon. He looked at Cadet Valerius, who gave him a shaky, deeply respectful salute. Conrad returned the salute, crisp and sharp. He didn't hate the suit anymore. He finally understood its purpose. The Lockheed Martin density rig wasn't a prison designed to hold him back. It was a promise to the rest of the galaxy. A promise of mercy from the children of Earth. If you enjoyed this HFY Sci-Fi original story about humanity's terrifying adaptation to the stars and the brutal reality of a high-gravity species unleashed, hit that like button. We bring you the most thrilling, adrenaline-pumping human supremacy stories in the galaxy every single week. Don't forget to share this tale with your fellow sci-fi fans, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss a moment of the action. Keep your gravity high and see you in the next one.